Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Rosa and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chavla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO and Head of Research, Brunello Rosa. This week, we're discussing Biden and his attempts to reshape global geopolitics with some very unexpected moves. Uh, Brunello, earlier in August, we heard about this deal that Biden was trying to break through to effectively normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Obviously, this has a very long political and diplomatic history. But tell me more about what motivated Biden's move and what are the sort of geopolitics of the region?
So there's lots going on in the Middle East, as you know, and definitely China and Russia have made huge strides in fostering their diplomatic presence and relationship in the region. We have spoken about a sort of strategic alliance that Saudi Arabia and China kind of decided to make a few months ago, while the welcoming by MBS to Biden's visit was kind of uh, I would say lukewarm, if not really cold. So clearly, it was time for the U.S. to reaffirm their presence in the region and to show that they can actually have an influence. In particular, after China managed to make this huge success of the signing of this rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the big enemies of the Middle East in Beijing as a broker of international affairs. So the US was kind of sidelining all this. It couldn't afford to do that. Now, if Saudi and Iran have already kind of reapproached, we also remember some of the moves under the Abraham Accord um, under the Trump administration, the only real kind of progress that needed to be made in the region was somehow a rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which again are on the two sides of the camp. Israel is not being recognized officially by many countries in the region. There's no diplomatic presence. There are no embassies, no consulates, exactly because most Arab countries don't recognize Israel itself. And as long as Israel does not recognize the state of Palestine, then no much progress can be made. So Biden decided to say, okay, let's try to make sure that these two countries now recognize each other. Funny enough, it is a well-known fact in the diplomatic world that although these two countries don't recognize each other, in fact, on the ground, they cooperate a lot, including on security matters, because their common enemy, if you want, is Iran, or at least used to be Iran. So, although they don't have official diplomatic recognition, unofficially, they of course cooperate. So, Biden wanted to bring this to the fore, make it formal, and of course, uh, that if ever happens, would be a huge diplomatic success for the Biden's administration.
And I mean, this has, again, like we said, a long history. China was involved in, as you know, part of this history, successfully brokering a pact between Saudi Arabia and Iran being signed in April. Uh, Tell me a bit more about that, but also tell me a bit more about sort of other obstacles that President Biden might face on the road to normalization.
Yeah, so the problem is that while Biden's trying to do that, it's not the China standing still. And as we said, they continue to extend their influence in the entire Middle Eastern region and Northern Africa. So there's still kind of the new geopolitical rival to take into account. But there are some more specific, idiosyncratic, I would say, issues to be resolved in the first place. First of all, uh, the demands that Saudi Arabia makes in terms of Palestinian statehood may be hard to digest for Israel. Officially, we have seen in Israel, the back and forth of trying to recognize, parts of the Palestinian ambitions for a state over the course of the years, with in the Gaza Strip and so on. But the hard reality is that in fact, the settlements, the way they are called it somehow, have increased over time. Plus, the new government of Israel, as we know, is now more preoccupied with his own internal dynamics, the submission of the judiciary to effectively the government, which is causing huge protests and so on. So it might not be top of the agenda. The other thing is, of course, what Saudi wants out of this. Clearly, more investment by the US in its security and its armaments. And that is another bill to be presented to Congress by President Biden. At the time, he's spending lots of money for Ukraine, for example. So the Congress might be reluctant to pass this bill. I would say, last but not least, the fact that, of course, there are presidential elections looming. And first of all, this gives no more than 9 months window to close a pact before the electoral campaign officially starts in the US, perhaps even a bit less than that. But most importantly, let's assume even that all these obstacles are removed and all parties are involved fully in this and back the pact. Yet a new president, assuming Trump elected again, but maybe somebody else, a new president may take this pact and tear it apart. So, as in fact Trump has done with many things that had been proved just before him. We remember the first action that he made was pulling out of the TPP. That is something on which Obama had invested almost 8 months of his, 8 years of his presidency. And also all the COP20 at the point 25, 26, let's say. So the Paris Agreement on climate change. So effectively, the new president can change everything. So why should anyone spend political capital for something that might not come to fruition in reality? So these are the biggest obstacles to this pact.
And if we look to the sort of complete other side of the world, the US administration has already managed to secure a deal signed in kind of the iconic Camp David between Japan and South Korea. Could you tell us a bit more about the deal, but also sort of the overarching geopolitical context of the US's increasing tensions with China and how this might play into it?
Yeah, so as we know, Biden needs to make progress on various parts of the world. Everywhere China is making progress. So we spoke about the Middle East, but of course the Far East is equally important. And in the Far East, we know there has been a historic rivalry between Japan and South Korea, dating back to World War II, of course. Now, ironically, they are both best allies of the US in the region. So it's kind of the US is my best friend, says Japan. The US is my best friend, says South Korea. But how can the two of us, South Korea and Japan, be enemies somehow, rival, or in any case with tense diplomatic relationships? It didn't hold. And on this premise, China has actually countered because they said, well, South Korea and Japan will never come to good terms. This is a typical example of divide impera in the region, which has allowed China to increase their influence over those countries. So they wanted to close this gap. They went to Camp David. They signed an agreement which effectively established a stronger security cooperation, an annual meeting among these three countries to check the progress of what has been made, and a series of economic pacts just to resist to what they call China's economic coercion. So the fact that China can be at the beginning of many supply chains around the world, and having some of the rare earths and raw materials that are needed around the world, they can kind of exert what is called economic coercion. So they can say, look, you need to do what I want because you have no alternative. So all these things are entered into this pact. Let's see how it goes. The good thing compared to the Middle Eastern piece that we discussed before is that this has already been signed, so it's not somehow an how can I say a wish is actually now reality. Just to finish off, effectively, we know that Biden is doing all this because he wants to leave the US in a stronger position vis-a-vis China in Cold War II. So in the big rivalry that they have for, let's call it, world domination, to use an exaggerated expression, over the next century. And clearly these are two important pieces of this jigsaw, but still there are many others that needs to go to the right place, and it will take still a lot of time and effort. And especially China has one coherent, consistent leadership. The US changes at least every 4 years. It could be 8, and so is subject to swings. That doesn't make they don't make this attempt easier. In fact, it's actually harder for the US to do that.
Right. Every president wants to leave their sort of lasting kind of legacy, especially in American foreign policy. And we see these sort of decisions that have been, or these deals that have been trying to be negotiated for years, often come through in the last months of presidency. And with the way the sort of GOP candidacy is evolving, this might well be something that Biden remains known for, or perhaps one of the only things he remains known for. But as always, Brunello, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you. Until next time.